Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Daphne podcast. I'm joined today by Jenny, who's had type 1 diabetes for a while now and attended a Daphne course in 2017. So, Jenny, you're very welcome this morning. Tell me a little bit about your diabetes journey. So, when were you diagnosed? How you were diagnosed? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Liesl, and thanks for inviting me onto this. So, I was diagnosed in 2015. I was 29 at the time, and I all of a sudden just started to sleep a lot and eat a lot, and interestingly lost weight. And I was like, what on earth is going on? I can drink full fat Coke and eat Mars bars and not put weight on. But you know, on the more serious note, I was falling asleep. I travelled to Edinburgh every week, and I'd fall asleep on the plane before it even took off, and then I'd be woken up by the cabin crew to say that we'd landed, and that wasn't me. That just didn't sit right. That it was, and that was probably a 2-week period. And someone said to me, I think you're diabetic. I was like, firstly, what is that? And secondly, don't be silly. And then I Googled the symptoms of diabetes, and I ticked every single one, you know, going to the toilet 8 or 9 times during the night, but not realising I was doing it, or that was a problem, being really thirsty continuously, you know, losing weight, and just being tired. I mean, you know, so tired I couldn't function. And so I booked a doctor's appointment and went to the doctors, and I said, oh, Google tells me I'm diabetic. And the doctor laughed at me, and I was like, but I'm so poorly and I don't know what to do about it. So they checked my blood sugars and they were 25. And she was like, oh, yes, you are. And it was all a bit all over the place as to what to do with me and where to send me. And I ended up being sent home with a blood sugar of 25, and told that someone would be in touch with me. And maybe 3 or 4 days later, I rang back and said, I am so poorly, someone needs to help me. So another doctor saw me and was like, I can't believe you've been sent home, basically, off you go to the hospital. And that's where my diabetes journey started. I don't have diabetes in the family, so when I rang my mum and was like, I'm diabetic, she just didn't know what to say or do, and she just cried. I cried, and I don't really know why we cried, because we didn't actually understand the illness that was in front of me. I spent probably a couple of hours with a nurse, a diabetic nurse, who went through the basics of diabetes with me and sent me on my merry way with some insulin, and just kind of off I went. And my job at the time required me, as I'd mentioned, to be, I was in Edinburgh. My job at the time required me to travel quite a lot. And I was off up to Manchester that night, or the following day. And off I went with my insulin pens, and thought, oh, you know what, maybe I just need to be healthier. Because again, I didn't understand what type 1 diabetes was. And so I ordered myself a chicken Caesar salad, and injected 8 units of insulin, and didn't understand why all of a sudden I felt very weak and very dizzy and very on the floor, quite literally. And it was my first experience of a hypo in a hotel room, completely on my own, not knowing what on earth to do about it. And thank goodness I'd listened, because I got myself some full fat Coke, and then rang my nurse the next day, and she said, well, you didn't have any carbohydrates with a chicken Caesar salad, so of course you don't need to inject. I was like, well, no one told me that. You told me for every meal I needed to inject 8 units of insulin. And at the time it wasn't I'm gonna naivety now, but I was on kind of a different set of injections. It was kind of, you took them any irrelevant of what you were eating and things like that. And then it, you know, over the next probably few weeks, I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is this? I'm just following instruction. And I literally had been given 2 hours of a nurse's time, and then I was off on my own. And I don't know if it's because I was 29 and not 9, or they thought, oh, this one can understand what she's doing, or they just didn't have the resource to look after me necessarily in the same way as others. But yeah, it was quite a shock to all of us. And yes, all I kept telling myself was, I just need to eat healthy. You know, let's just not eat chocolate, and let's not eat cake, and maybe I'll be okay. But no one had really explained what diabetes was to me.
And there's so much on the internet, isn't there, that when you look on the internet, you never know what's relevant and what isn't, and whether you should be paying attention to something or not, because you don't know if it's a credible website or if it's somebody that hasn't got a clue, that's just sharing their own ill-founded opinions, isn't it?
Exactly. And I also, I think when you're diagnosed with something like that, I didn't want to read what my illness was necessarily. Maybe I did, and I look back, but it didn't tell me anything. It didn't teach me anything about what I needed to do. All I kept thinking was, they just told me to inject, and I don't know what I'm injecting and how to inject it, but I'm doing what I'm told, and hopefully I'll be okay. But I didn't. Like you say, you look on a website and you go, well, what does that actually mean? No matter how well it's written, I'm someone who needs the theory in practice. And so no matter what I read, unless someone's showing me or doing it with me, I don't really get it. I've always been that kind of learner, and so yeah, it was just, I look back and reflect and think, God, I was in a whirlwind. I was in an absolute whirlwind of, God, I don't even know what's going on.
And I think you and I have talked before about something called health literacy, haven't we? Which is when it doesn't matter how intelligent we might think we are, but some people just find it more difficult to grasp their health condition and to apply what they know to their health condition. And it's just one of those things, isn't it, that is often overlooked. So even though you've got a job, you're traveling a lot, you're doing lots of things, and suddenly just feeling overwhelmed with your diagnosis, really.
I owned a house, I lived on my own, I was incredibly independent, I didn't need help, and then all of a sudden I'd got this illness that I just, one, didn't understand, and two, didn't know how to understand it. And it was only later in my journey that I was told about health literacy, and it really resonated with me, because I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, but I get by and I've got a good job and I do well. But the idea of trying to understand what on earth was going on in my world, I just spiraled and just even switched it off. The idea of trying to learn about my diabetes and how to manage it was just something with very limited help. Is the focus here, is that to try and teach it myself just was incomprehensible. I taught myself so many other things, and I think you're absolutely right. When it's a health condition of your own, if my sister had been diagnosed with it, I'd have done every minute of research I could have done and found out everything. But the idea it was me and no one else had it that I knew, I was like, you just go into block it. It'll go away. I'm sure it'll just disappear, or I'll do it one day. But yeah, health literacy is a massive thing, and I think it's not talked enough about or discussed enough about. So yeah, that was a big thing for me.
And when did you hear about Daphne? Who introduced you to the idea of Daphne, and what were your thoughts at first about it?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to meet my now husband, and he's a little bit older than me, and I wasn't no spring chicken, and we quite quickly talked about a family, and again, with my lack of knowledge of diabetes, I didn't actually know if I could have a family. I knew nothing about diabetes and children and having a family. So I contacted my doctors, who referred me to the pre-pregnancy clinic, and I met an incredible consultant who I will always be grateful for, because in Salford, and she was just real. I don't know how else to explain it, but she was just very real and very to the point. But I needed that. I needed someone to tell me, look, if you want what you want in life, you have to work for it. And that through growing up, things just don't get given to you on a plate. But I needed someone to sit me down and go, this is quite serious. And how serious it was my HbA1c was 108, which for any diabetic will know that that's pretty significant. That's far too high. And how on earth I was still, functioning, I do not know. And actually, on reflection, I was currently going through it wasn't long after that I ended up having 3 months off work with burnout because my body just had given up. I luckily never went into DKA, but I think your body can manage in other ways to get through, and I physically had nothing left of me. So she was the one who sat me down and said, if you want a child, you've got to sort your life out. Quite literally, those were her words. And it shocked me. And then I was like, but I don't know how. I literally don't know how to do this. I am playing, my words were, I am playing at diabetes. And if anything, I'd rejected it by that point. I didn't want it. No one knew what it was in my family, so no one could help me. And I just got by. I literally got by. And I didn't want, I didn't want to keep injecting this stuff that I didn't really understand what I was doing and how to do it. And I just, as I said, I was playing at it and pretending I knew what I was talking about. I'd proudly tell people I'm type 1 diabetic, but actually what that meant, I actually had no idea. And it was her that told me about Daphne. And I was like, oh, a week off work? That's a lot to ask. And she went, well, we do this 5x1 course now where you have 1 day off a week. And you go in and you do your course. And to be honest, there was no part of me that questioned it, because I knew I needed help. I knew I wanted some form of education to teach me what on earth to do with this stuff. Like, what have I got and how am I going to manage it? And actually, ultimately, my goal was I wanted a child. And would that be possible? I don't know. But at the time, I'd try anything to get to that point. So I was very lucky. I know that in some circumstances waiting list can be as long as your arm, but I was very lucky that that was probably the beginning of the year, and I went on my first course in April, and my first day was in April. And so I decided to opt for the 5x1 course. I was very privileged in as much as my work, I was in a position at work where I could just take the time, and I didn't have to not be paid, or I was very lucky in that respect that I'd got an employer that understood, supported you. Supported, and knew ultimately they'd get the better part out of me the other side, because I wouldn't have the sick days and I wouldn't be literally exhausted and on the not functioning and not being able to get to different parts of the country, if not the world. I'd been invited to India, but I couldn't go because physically I knew that I wasn't in the right health to go to a country I didn't know, without having some form of control over my illness. So I went off to Daphne in April 2017. And
who did you meet? What other people did you meet on your Daphne course?
So I interestingly, I'm sure we'll talk about the course, but the people I met were the things that kept me going. So I met some lovely ladies who I now still have a WhatsApp group with, and we still talk, 4 years on, 5 years on, and they were all in different stages of their lives. One was a mum, one was pregnant, another one was a mum, but probably wasn't in control of her diabetes enough to be able to be a mum, and that was a really interesting dynamic. I met a few lads on the course as well, but we, boys and girls were different, and the girls were really gelled, and the guys really, there was a guy a little bit older than me. I was probably the oldest female on the course, and then there was a guy who just was really shocked that he'd got diabetes, and he was in his 40s and he just couldn't comprehend it at all. But we gelled as a group, and that was really lovely. And I really enjoyed the 5x1 because it meant we built a relationship over a 5-week period, because ultimately the 1 week course is amazing, don't get me wrong. I've heard really good things about it, but you're only together for 1 week and it's quite intense, whereas the 5x1 you build a relationship not only with your peers but with the healthcare professionals that are teaching at the time as well, and they were incredible. I've kept in touch with them, Jackie and Jenny, their names were, and they wanted to hear, they knew I was doing this because I wanted children. So when I got pregnant and actually had little Felix, I let them know, and they sent me, you know, messages and a card, and, you know, just really invested in me because they knew how important it was. So yeah, my little WhatsApp group, we're all mums now, and mums have all but one of us have got more than one, and it's just lovely to experience that with other type 1 diabetics and type 1s that want to be mums as well. So that was really lovely. And that wasn't planned by any stretch. It wasn't like, oh, these all want to be mums, or let's all put the mums together. It was just the group that we were putting at the time.
Yeah. Just how it happened. And it sounds like it was probably the first time you'd ever really talked to anybody else with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because, you know, you hear that 400,000 people have got type 1 diabetes in the country. Now, I think that's the number. I don't actually know. But you actually don't realise how few people that is in an environment that you are. And actually, I hadn't come across another type 1. I'd come across type 2s, or you know, people that were, you know, my father-in-law at the time was a pre-diabetic, and, you know, we talked, but I mean, they're completely different things. Type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes is very different. It can be very similar, but they are very different. So yeah, it was really nice to hear other people's experiences. And, you know, yes, we'd all been through the mill in some way. Some had it from childhood, some had I mean, one guy had it from like 18 months old, which is very, very rare.
So he didn't remember a time without it.
No, exactly. But we'd all been through some form of rejection, or some form of not understanding our illness. You know, and like I say, I was one of the older ones. These are, you know, some are quite early into their adulthood as such, and realised that they also needed to control their, you know, they hadn't got the luxury of their mom injecting for them anymore or telling them what to do. They wanted to live on their own, and they wanted the ability to do that, and they all felt that that's what Daphne was going to bring them.
So your motivation for doing Daphne was because you wanted to have a child.
Yeah.
And you told us that you've got little Felix.
Yeah.
So how did Daphne help you when you were actually pregnant? What kind of aspects of Daphne did you find really beneficial?
So I will always say that Daphne had gave me the education I needed to understand my illness and to be able to manage it. And so I went from 108 HbA1c from 108 to 54 within, I think, 6 months. And then I went to see my diabetes pregnancy consultant again, and I'd got it down to 47, and she gave me the green light at that point. And at no point at this stage we hadn't got CGM, so we hadn't got the continuous glucose monitoring, and I was still finger pricking my finger probably every 2 hours because I desperately wanted control of my blood sugars. But Daphne taught me to do that. Without anything else, it taught me how to carb count properly, but not just the 1 to 10 ratio that everyone thinks it is, but to flux that where needed, or to understand and listen to your body, and to, you know, if you put a bit of weight on, you might need to up your background insulin. To do some exercise, you might need to think about your carb ratio and how much you inject. To think about the fact that actually, and this is a really big one for me, that any exercise I didn't necessarily impact me at that point, but maybe 24 hours later.
Okay, yeah.
And little things like that, it's not just about a 1 to 10 ratio of your carb counting, it's everything that goes around that, and having the control to be in control of your diabetes and not allowing it to control you. So me listening to my body, me reading my blood sugars and reacting to them, rather than just going, oh, I'm just about to eat, so let's just inject some insulin. Because ultimately, if I think back to pre-Daphne, that is what I did. Yeah. And sometimes I just didn't inject because I didn't understand. I didn't want it. I didn't get it. And actually, it was easier not to inject. I didn't realise the impact it was having on my internal body, but actually it was easier not to do it because I didn't understand what I was doing. So when they gave me the green light, and quite literally, you need that green light, because you don't, like, she sat me down and said, your body may not conceive at the moment, and if you did, you potentially would create quite a, you know, you might miscarry, you might there might
baby
be
might not
baby, there might, you might end up delivering a baby that's not alive, all those things that are risks in any situation, but you're increasing their risk having an HbA1c of 108, and it's just not worth it. So I had that as a motivator. It was my focus and my need, and I've always been, if I can see an end result or a goal, I'll do my best to get there. So it
sounds like you had a really frank conversation with the pre-pregnancy consultant. She was really honest with you, wasn't she?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you need that sometimes. You need that, you need to put your big girl pants on and you need to sort your life out, because if you want this, ultimately you're risking your own health, let alone a baby's. And unfortunately we did have 2 miscarriages before Felix, and they were early miscarriages, and my instant reaction was, is it because I'm diabetic? Is it because of my body? What is it? And actually, my consultant, who actually continued to be my consultant, even though she'd been my pre-pregnancy consultant, she was my pregnancy consultant, was like, no, Jenny, your HbA1c couldn't be any better. You are so in control of your diabetes. Your time in range is strong, all that jazz. Your body just does this stuff. And Liesl, you and I talked about 1 in 4 pregnancies can end in miscarriage, but you don't understand that necessarily at the time unless you've done all your millions of research. So ultimately we'd got into our head that we needed to get through the 3rd miscarriage. It sounds awful, but we'd get to go through the 3rd miscarriage to be able to start tests, because you have to have 3 miscarriages before you get authorised for any tests. And I was like, right, well, horrific as it is, let's get to that stage, see how we go. And honestly, I took a pregnancy test every day for 6 weeks because I was so fearful of not knowing when it was going to happen. And then when the pregnancy tests still kept coming back positive, I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Like, this is so, and being diabetic, you get incredible care from the NHS. There's nothing I could fault about the care. And your pregnancy journey starts a lot earlier, being diabetic, so you get an early scan because of the risks you've got being diabetic. They identify if there's a heartbeat, they check for defects, things that are quite critical from that very early onset. And you start your blood tests, you start your consultants appointments, all that jazz. And so, your journey starts much earlier, and the anxiety is reduced by that journey starting earlier. So I had my first early scan at 8 weeks with Felix, and there was a heartbeat, and it was just the most incredible feeling and experience. But it was the beginning of what is going to be a complicated and difficult journey. Yeah. But as long as I knew, as long as I used my Daphne principles, I'd be okay, because it taught me that I was in control of my diabetes, irrelevant of any external factor. I could control and look after my diabetes. Now, diabetes and pregnancy, they don't particularly go well together, because your body starts to reject insulin quite early. You have to injecting more and more insulin into your body, which was quite a new, like, I couldn't quite get my head around it. But I was getting to the point where I was quite lucky that my ratios were 1 to 10 quite all the way through up and until I got pregnant. And then nearer the end of my pregnancy, I think I was I was injecting nearly 200 units of insulin a day.
Which is an awful lot for somebody with type 1 diabetes, pretty much, isn't it?
A huge amount, but I was in control. I knew that by that, I was tweaking and turning, I had a consultant every 2 weeks. I saw a consultant. Again, you have to give quite a lot of time up being diabetic and pregnant, because you have a scan every 4 weeks, post 24 weeks, I think it is, to keep an eye on baby, because baby can get big. You have your blood tested however many times in your pregnancy, but you also have that amazing meeting with your consultant, and it's a diabetes consultant and a gynae consultant every 2 weeks, and I couldn't have been more grateful for that, because you just talk things through with them. But actually I was telling them things, you know, I was like, I've tweaked my background insulin because I noticed that my bloods were higher in the morning, or I have upped my ratios because I went up to 12 in after my meal. And they were like, oh, and I was like, it's Daphne. Daphne has told me how to manage my diabetes. Yeah. And I'm not saying this because I'm doing a Daphne podcast. I'm saying this because it is my genuine belief that had it have not been for Daphne, I wouldn't have my now 2 very healthy children. Yeah. And it got me through really difficult. Pregnancy is not easy for anyone, you know, no matter how many people will tell you how wonderful it is, and it is a wonderful experience. It's, you know, you're carrying a baby for 9 months, you know, and I, you know, so Daphne was a thing that got me through, along with the NHS. I will always advocate how the NHS, you know, is incredible. I made some personal decisions. So when it comes to pregnancy and diabetes, they don't like you, you know, the NHS don't like you to go to 40 weeks because your risks are heightened at that point to baby and to you. So they like to deliver you, dependent on your control and your HbA1c and all that, they like to deliver you anywhere after the 37-week mark. I'm going to use this word, anal about my blood sugars. I had the luxury of a CGM by this point. With Felix, I had a Libra, and with Ottilie, my youngest daughter, I had the Dexcom. And I was all about HbA1c and time in range. And I was so determined that but in both pregnancies, my HbA1c was at 38, which is sometimes. Yeah, sometimes a blood sugar, you know, not a non-diabetic might not have an HbA1c of 38. So I was very controlled, and so therefore they took me as close to the 39-week stage as they could. So with Felix, I delivered at 38 plus 2. And with Ottilie, I delivered at 38 plus 6, so the last possible day. And I made a personal choice to have cesarean sections. Now, I always said if I went into spontaneous labour before that, I would happily, you know, attempt vaginal birth. Delivery, but I didn't want to be induced. And that was a personal thing for me. And therefore, I knew I wanted the control, and you know, induction can take up to 5 days. That's the reality, and you're on a sliding scale, so you have less control of your diabetes.
You mean the hospital would have been in control of your insulin rather than you?
Yes, exactly. And so I just needed to. I felt like it was important to me to have the cesarean section, and I had those very honest conversations with my consultants quite early on. I'd done my research. They were incredible. They gave me lots of research about pros and cons, and you know, my husband and I sat down and made some really informed decisions. The other thing I did, I wasn't married to my husband when we were pregnant with Felix, and very last minute made a very big decision to get married, and that's because of the, you know, randomness of how we work in the UK and the NHS, that actually with Ben not being married to me, he couldn't make decisions for Felix when he was born, and I didn't know what state I would be in because of having an extra health condition and not knowing what the outcome might be. I wanted him to have the right to make any decisions as much as I did. So we got married 2 weeks before Felix was born, and I had 4 pairs of shoes on my wedding day because I didn't know which one would fit. But ultimately, it all came right in the end, you know, and it was all because I controlled my diabetes, and I controlled it through Daphne. And I know to this day, if I'd not gone on that course, I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in. I know I wouldn't, you know, I don't think I would have ever got pregnant. You know, I just don't think it would have happened because I didn't understand my condition. I didn't want to understand my condition, and because I didn't realise there was a way of managing it and having a very normal life. I eat what I want, you know, I drink what I want, I do what I want, you know, in every way, shape or form, because I know how to manage and control my diabetes, and that's through Daphne, you know. So I couldn't be a bigger advocate. I think it's the best thing that exists, and you know, admittedly I don't have anything to compare it to, but the fact is I had nothing to compare it to, because I was off. There was nothing else that you know, no matter how much Googling I did or how many people I spoke to, no one really could explain my condition. Whereas Daphne did. You know, it didn't just teach you how to manage it, it taught you why you had to manage it, and how, and you know, it sounds silly, but the boxes of, one of the sessions is all about boxes of food and working out your carb, right, which one's got carbohydrates in and which ones hadn't. As simple as that. I just thought eggs had carbohydrates in it. They don't. You know, like, you don't really think about these things until you need to, do you? And then the, you know, doctor session, a doctor comes in on your Daphne course to talk to you and ask you and answer any question you had. And I asked a million questions about getting pregnant, and you could tell he was like, oh my God. And but ultimately you got that opportunity where some people might not have seen a healthcare professional in that you know, they may have only seen a nurse, or you know, they might have not got in front of a doctor for a while, but you've got that opportunity after doing 4 days of Daphne, of asking all the questions you might have for a doctor and learning a little bit more ultimately. So no, I like I say, I've got 2 very healthy children. I'm very lucky to have them. I know that it's Daphne that got me to that point.
It's lovely to hear your story. You've achieved so much, and you've got the life that you really wanted, and that you've achieved the goal that you wanted to get, which was to have children, and you've now got a lovely Felix and the little Ottilie, which is just delightful. And I know that during pregnancy things are slightly different from Daphne, because you have to check your blood glucose more often, don't you? But still, having that fundamental knowledge base means that you were able to understand what was going on and what to do about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
fantastic. So if somebody was listening to this podcast today and they've been offered a Daphne course and they think, well, I don't know, I don't think it's for me, I don't think I'll learn anything that I don't know already, what would you say to those people?
Just do it. If you learn one thing from it, it's more than you knew by not doing it. And I learned a million things, not only through the education, but through the friendships I have formed, or even if they're not friends, they're peers, the understanding that others have been through the same thing, the understanding that everyone's different, no diabetes the same, but having the education or the foundations to know how to manage your illness takes that illness away a little bit. You are in control, it's not in control of you, and that is something that will stick with me forever. I didn't want something, I felt like diabetes controlled me. It did everything. It overpowered everything I did. I was tired, I was thirsty, I was going to the toilet a lot, I felt like I didn't know who I was, you know, all that stuff. Even as a diabetic taking insulin, those were the side effects I was seeing. Whereas Daphne took all that away, and it made me in control. It allowed me to understand what my illness was and how I would manage it, and how it didn't control me. I had control of it. So I would just say to anyone, it's an incredible educational program that not only is teaching you something, but it allows you to form an understanding of other people's circumstances as well. And you're not in it alone. You're not the only diabetic in the town. And you've got other people around you. And I've moved away, you know, I did it in Manchester or Salford, and I now live up in Yorkshire, and I still have contact, and we still talk about meeting, you know, we have met up and we have gone for a drink, and you know, and all that, because you have something in common, and you talk to each other about that stuff as well. So no, I'd just say go for it.
Thank you very much, Jenny. It sounds like such an empowering experience for you and for the other people that you're on the course with. So thank you very much indeed for joining me today. It's been really lovely listening to what you've got to say.
Perfect. Thanks, Liesl. Thanks for your time too.
Thank you.